Well, good evening, one and all, to this, the fourth session on the Progressive Christianity Network program for 2024. Esmond's been having almost a coronary here as the slides seem to have disappeared, but we're grateful that Fergus has managed to get them back up again. My welcome extends not only to you sitting here in Christchurch, but to those who are online through live streaming, watching this presentation tonight. I'm sure that whether we're here in person in this place or whether we are using the internet, it will be a very rewarding evening. A couple of housekeeping things for those unfamiliar with the layout of this place. The toilets are through the door you came through. Ladies to the right and gents to the left. Have I got that right? I hope so, but I'm sure you'll work it out. Please set your phones to silent or turn them off. And I've taken the precaution of doing that. It's nothing more embarrassing than people hearing my phone go off. And so all that remains is for me to introduce our speaker for tonight. I'll return at the end of the session with some information about future events. And if you were given a feedback form, please keep that in your hot little hand and fill it in at the end. There was one person unnamed who was proposing to fill in the form before Esmond spoke. We won't do that. The topic of Esmond's presentation, spirituality, what some people call a spiritual awakening, and others even a spiritual revolution. This transformation is characterised by a departure from traditional religious structures and a growing interest in new patterns of faith. In this session tonight, we'll explore the concept of spirituality, its emergence, features, various forms of expression and significance. Our speaker, as I've mentioned, is Esmond. Esmond grew up in Wolseley in the southeast and began his working life as a secondary maths and science teacher. A call to ministry in the late 60s saw him training at Park and Wesley College, then serving in parish ministry in the Uniting Church, celebrating 50 years of ordination in 2023. He worked for nearly 30 years, you wonder how he fits all this together, at UniSA as the manager of student services. I wouldn't say that, Esmond. Across 5 campuses, and during that time completed a master's degree in social sciences, counselling. In retirement, if you can call it that, since 2010, he's been actively involved in supporting refugees, in progressive Christianity, in ministry, and he says widely travelling. So with that sort of a track record, Esmond comes to us with an extremely fruitful background and well able to comment on the subject that he's taken, the significance of the spirituality revolution. Over to you, Esmond.
Thank you, Don, for your welcome and introducing the topic. I'll just begin with an acknowledgement of country. We recognise the Kaurna people as the traditional owners of the land on which we meet tonight, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present and commit to walking together into the future. So, in terms of the topic, the significance of the spirituality revolution, what I've decided to do in exploring this topic is to introduce you to several people who will contribute to the presentation. I've chosen them because they all have a lot to say, and what they do say is very worthwhile. They will each contribute to our understanding of spirituality. We will explore various aspects of spirituality in our time, consider whether the increasing interest is actually a revolution, and reflect on the significance of contemporary trends. So I hope you will follow my thinking as we proceed. And the first person I will introduce to you is Rachel Conn. Rachel wrote a book called The New Believers, Reimagining God. She also recently presented at the Progressive Christianity Network of Victoria a presentation on what's temporary and what's eternal in current spiritual trends. You might know Rachel as the presenter of the program on Radio National, The Spirit of Things. So, as we know, she has a great interest in spirituality. What I want to do is to use a quote from her presentation at the Progressive Christianity Network of Victoria, because it's a very provocative quote, but very profound. It's a strong statement that I will quote, and when I've read it, I will invite you to comment on it, to share your thoughts about it. So listen to the quote, and I'll have it on the screen, and then we're going to talk about it at the end. Despite all the moaning and groaning that religion is disappearing because the pews are more empty than full, there are fewer eligible men joining the priesthood, and church real estate is being sold off. Despite all that, we can rest assured that the spiritual yearning in the individual breast is not dying off. What is temporarily making itself felt right now, however, is the grief that has resulted from a misappropriation of values onto things which are seemingly spiritual but are in fact material. Having confused religion with edifices and clerical jobs, those who ought to care about the spiritual health of the people can be seen regularly weeping at wakes for a body that is not there. Funnily enough, religion has resurrected somewhere else, and the people in charge have not noticed. Don't you think that's a great quote? Well, here it is in its entirety. What do you think Rachel is actually getting at in this quotation? That's not a rhetorical question, so I'm afraid, Fergus, I'll need to get you to walk around with the roving mic, because we want to honour the people that watch us online, and so they will want to hear the comments that people make.
Don't be afraid.
So, what do you think Rachel's getting at here?
It's certainly a profound quote. I've noticed that in my circle of people I hang out with, they don't go to church as much as they used to because they don't feel the spiritual connection that they used to, or the ones that they yearn for. You'll find them on online forums discussing God, or in personal little groups, instead of your traditional church. Due to the lack of enthusiasm or understanding from their point of view, and the lack of understanding from the growing older community of the church.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, also, about that, I would say that unfortunately have a probably well-earned mistrust of institutional religion, because it can be a place that causes a lot of pain and hurt and misunderstanding if it's not an inclusive place or not the welcoming place it should be.
Okay, yes.
there is organised religion, or church if you like, and then there is faith. And we confuse the two. You know, we think religion is equivalent to faith, and what Rachel is saying is, and the other people who have spoken have said, is that's not so.
Okay, thanks, Max. Grant.
Esmond, I was taken by the comment about the pews, and I believe someone spoke here several meetings ago and pointed out that that was an institution that was invented to give a class structure to the church, and probably that's been outdated. And I'm very taken with what's being happening. I think it's Lincoln Cathedral, where they're putting the model railway through the on the floor of the cathedral, and they have enormous numbers of people coming through, and they're having other traditional forms of worship going on at the same time. And it's sort of, that pew sort of said, perhaps people are more prepared for a more democratic religion than has been in the past. It has been in the established church in the past.
Right, thank you. I'm sure Rachel would be very interested in the comments on her quote. There is another comment? Okay.
The quote I heard quite some time ago keeps coming back to me, that we were given spirituality eons ago and we took it in both hands and squeezed the life out of it.
Uh-huh. That's a sensible thing. I've got a book here which sort of reflects that. Let me just read this first sentence of this book called Reclaiming Spirituality. Our spiritual story as a human species is at least 70,000 years old. By comparison, the formal religions have existed for a mere 4,500 years. At the moment, therefore, I wish to establish the centrally important distinction between spirituality and religion. The latter refers to those formally institutionalised structures, rituals and beliefs, etc. Spirituality concerns an ancient and primal search for meaning that is as old as humanity itself. So that fits with what you're saying. Pardon? I don't think I can pronounce it. Diarmuid o Merchu. I'll let you have a look at the book, but don't read it while I'm talking. Okay, so what I want to do is to use Rachel's quotation as a structure for our presentation tonight. We've looked at the quotation where there's an indication of religion declining and spirituality ascending, which leads to the spirituality revolution, and then we will look at its significance. So, to contribute to our thoughts on religion declining and spirituality ascending, I would like to introduce you to our second person, who actually just disappeared, Hugh Mackay. And Hugh wrote this book, Beyond Belief, How We Find Meaning with or Without Religion. You may already know Hugh Mackay. He's an Australian psychologist, a social researcher and writer. He was a weekly newspaper columnist for 25 years and is a regular commentator on the ABC, radio and television. He's actually speaking at the Hawke Centre, UniSA, on the 25th of this month. and his topic is The Way We Are. The publicity for his address says, life is messy, relationships are complex, outcomes are uncertain. Yet none of our differences, whether based on ethnicity, politics, religion, cultural tastes and preferences, or gender, none of them are nearly as significant as the humanity we share. Now, that sounds like a great topic, but unless you've already secured a seat, you can't go because it's fully booked. People are very interested in those kinds of topics these days. So I chose to include Hugh Mackay in this presentation tonight because of his book, Beyond Belief, in which he argues that a growing number of people are abandoning religion in favour of a different kind of spirituality, one not restricted by institutions and guidelines. In his book, Mackay includes the results of research carried out by the Pew Research Centre, which is based in Washington, DC. This is a non-sectarian think tank that informs the public about the issues, the attitudes, and the trends shaping the world. One of the areas of interest to Pew Research is religion, and a specific section of the centre is identified as the Global Religious Futures Project. Now, the centre conducts public opinion polls, random surveys, media content analysis, and a whole range of other social science research activities. And this appeals to me because gaining evidence to support claims you make is really important. But I would have to say that I found some of the evidence that he quotes most surprising. The introduction is entitled Religion Goes Marching On, and he reports that globally religion is on the rise. For example, in the very countries where the most vigorous attempts have been made to stamp out religion, in Russia under Stalin, in India under Nehru, and in China under Mao Zedong, in those countries the evidence is that there has been a massive upswing in religious interest. Results that were surprising as I read them include these. Russia's President Vladimir Putin maintains a private chapel and sometimes wears a baptismal cross. I did find that surprising. And the Russian security organisation, the successor to the KGB, has its own Orthodox church just across the road from its Moscow headquarters. So that's Russia. In China, the post-Mao rise of religion has been extraordinary. At the time of Mackay writing his book in 2016, the Pew Research Centre's 2006 Global Attitudes Project reported that 31% of Chinese people regard religion as either somewhat important or very important. They are mostly Buddhist, Taoist, or Confucian, but in terms of Christianity, there are now many more Christians in China than members of the Communist Party. Pew Research projects that by 2030, which is not too far away, there will be more Christians in China than in any other country on earth. By then, Chinese churchgoers will outnumber US churchgoers. And then other research that he quotes in his book predicts that by 2050, China will be the world's biggest Muslim nation as well as the world's biggest Christian nation. So that's rather remarkable, don't you think, for a country that's tried vigorously to stamp out religion. So these surprising results, along with the commitment to religion in Latin America, Africa and the Middle East, all contribute to the massive global rise in religion. But we don't see that in Australia, do we? In fact, religious observance in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Scandinavia and some parts of Western Europe paints a very different picture from the global trend. In those places, there is plenty of evidence that religious affiliation and church attendance has been continually waning for the last 50 years. Some commentators refer to this as the West's post-Christian era. Now, the census figures show the decline in glaring terms, and I contacted the Department of Census and Statistics to get some comments from them, and from the 2021 census, the key findings are that Christianity decreased by more than 1 million people, but is still Australia's most common religion. But the other thing in the key findings is that almost 10 million Australians reported having no religion. 10 million, quite a percentage. In fact, I looked at the actual results for Christianity and no religion since 1971. In 1971, Christianity represented 86% of Australia. In 91, 74%. In 2011, 61%. In 2021, 43%. So a drop from 86% to 43%. That's just exactly half. And the no religion from 1971, 6%, 91, 12%, 2011, 23%, and 2021, 38%. That's 7 times, or 6 times, as many no religions in 21 as in 1971. That's the census figures. Then I looked also at the Act 2 project in the Uniting Church, which is looking at the fact that the Uniting Church is not what we were in 1977 when we began. And so they have this project that's been going on for a few years, looking at declining membership and ageing demographics, which have led to underutilised properties, constrained financial environments, and strains on the structural sustainability of our church. This is from their report. And so they're now in the third and final phase of looking at the causes and consequences of these strains so that effective solutions can be identified. and they are going to be put as recommendations for action to the 17th Assembly of the Uniting Church in July this year. Then we have the National Christian Life Survey, which shows a loss of 300,000 people that attend church from 1991 to 2016. But this, I think, is the most interesting thing for our topic tonight. The National Christian Life Survey do community surveys every time they do their surveys, and on this occasion they ask people in their community survey what is their preferred spiritual practice. And it's interesting that spending time in nature is the highest, 57%. Listening to music that lifts my spirits, 47%. Prayer, meditation and mindfulness, 32%. Attending religious services, 16%. Religious or spiritual reading, 13%. Religious or spiritual talks, clips, podcasts, 10%. Small groups for spiritual or social support, 9%. And other spiritual practices, 2%, none of the above, 23%, which really is quite an interesting result of a survey which shows what spiritual practices people are interested in these days. So in the face of this massive decline in religion in Australia, Mackay observes that the spirituality movement has captured the imagination of many people, especially young people, who vehemently deny any interest in religion but still want to explore the non-material values and concepts traditionally associated with religion. He devotes a whole chapter in his book, replete with case studies, to the increasing number of people who identify as spiritual but not religious and form part of the spiritual but not religious movement. When I looked at the key findings from our census, that 10 million people in Australia have no religion, that did strike me as rather odd. And I noticed a note here which says, for the purposes of this article which they sent me, no religion refers to the broad group secular beliefs and other spiritual beliefs. So I thought the reports in the papers every time we have a census that the percentage of people who have no religion goes up is rather dramatic. But when you think it also includes other spiritual beliefs, then it gives you a false impression. So there was a fellow that came to one of our meetings here once who was at one time the manager of the Australian Bureau of Statistics in Adelaide. So I just happened to have his mobile number and I rang him up today and I said, I've got this report and it shows, 10 million people in Australia have no religion. But does that mean that they're atheists or they have no beliefs? Isn't this a bit misleading? What I see from the notes is that no religion also includes people who have spiritual practices. And he said, yes, that's true. So, in fact, that 10 million could include heaps of millions of people who are spiritual but not religious because they don't tick a box on the census form that identifies them as having a religion. So I think that's really misleading, don't you think? Or is it just me that thinks that? The decline in religion and the ascendancy of spirituality is a Western phenomenon, not a global phenomenon. So I have to qualify the topic for tonight and change it to the significance of the spirituality revolution in the West. Rachel Conn introduced us to the notion of spirituality, and Hugh Mackay extended our understanding of it by observing that whilst religion is waning, a more generic spirituality is very much on the rise. So far, we have loosely spoken of religion and spirituality without defining them. Before we move on, it might be a good idea to identify those terms. Are religion and spirituality one and the same thing? Are the two terms interchangeable, or do they refer to different concepts? Let's hear ideas that you might have about the terms religion and spirituality. So you're invited to put forward the ideas that you have about those two terms.
I'm biting at the bit.
Okay, well, you have to speak into the mic.
Okay. Well, I recently have been to the International Bonhoeffer thing, and wow.
Where was that? Here?
In Sydney.
Oh, Sydney.
The concept of religionless Christianity is a really interesting view on the topic of religion and spirituality. I myself, although I go to church, do not necessarily believe in the concept of religion as much as my friends and family do. I know it has its place with those who need it, and that need the community, the reassurance and guidance. But for those who are spiritually inclined with God and their points of view to it, it's not something that is always needed. It's like you can eat your meal in your room on your lap or sit at the table with the rest of the group. You don't need the table to have your dinner.
So you don't need the building to have your spirituality, you mean? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, any other differences that we might think of, or how would we define religion and spirituality? Yep.
Sorry, Esmond. I was thinking of the German situation. This is before the turn of the century. I was taken aside by a German lady, and she was interested in the fact that I was religious, but I didn't tithe. And I'm just wondering if that's a similar situation with the census. If we actually sat down and said how many people in Australia tithe, and that would show a similar decline. But also in the German situation, you have to nominate on your tax form whether you tithe or not, because they take an extra cut and it goes directly to the church. As this lady explained, before the turn of the century. I don't know if that's still the case. So there's sort of another aspect. You can look at spirituality, religion entirely and perhaps see how they are falling or gaining in Western religion.
Right. Yep. Mike?
Yeah, thank you. David Tacey, who was, and may still be a lecturer at La Trobe Uni in Melbourne, when I was a uni chaplain, he came and spoke with us. This is quite a long time ago, so he'd written soon at that stage a book called The Spirituality Revolution, 2003. But the interesting background to that is that, La Trobe Uni, as some of you may know, was a hotbed of revolutionary communists, basically in the 1970s or so, or maybe even earlier. It was only formed at that stage. It was the third university and the alternative university. And then by the time Tacey was actually lecturing there, he offered a course in spirituality at the university. And he had about 100 students in this. And most of them were the children of the radical communists from the 1970s, who were then asking, what is this religious stuff? And during this course, and this is according to what he said, they sort of explored both sides of spirituality and religion, and they started to realise that in actual fact, when you start to think about them, they can be two sides of the same coin. And it just depends how you approach each of them.
Mm.
So that was just an interesting aspect that I got from David Tacey, who himself hadn't been a Christian, and even then he wasn't a Christian, I don't think. And I don't know whether he is even a Christian now. Although I know that a number of them, about half a dozen of the academics there, used to read the Gospel as an academic, personal thing, not faith-wise, but just simply because they knew it was a significant. And each week they would meet for an hour or so and read a chapter of the Gospel, and talk about it, whatever else. So there's sort of this interest, even if it is from a distance.
Mm. Right, thank you.
I would say that the majority of my friends, or nearly all of my friends who don't identify as religious would say, I believe in something, I just don't know what it is. So whereas they, whether it should be or not, they identify the idea of religion as having some sort of certainty and imbued in it that they often shy away from, because they're like, I don't know if we really should be. So I don't know whether religion necessarily is always imbued with that certainty, and I don't think it should be, but I think a lot of what I hear is that people often think it is, and yeah, they shy away from that.
Okay.
That might be their search for meaning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. I did have access to a paper by Jonathan, and I have listed a few things about what is spirituality, but if there are other people that want to say things, go ahead. I'm just conscious of the time now.
It'll be quick. All I want to say is that I separate religion and spirituality because I always and still do regard religion as being associated with rules.
With
rules.
Oh, right.
And I've never been very good with rules.
Okay.
Venn diagram overlapping. I think you can have have religion that's spiritual, have a spirituality concept to it. You can have spirituality outside of religion. You can have religion that's all about rules. But I think there's an overlap.
Okay. Well, let me just run through this little list that I have here. Spirituality refers to a connection with something greater than oneself, to the ways in which human beings relate to the sacred. Unlike organised religion, spirituality is more subjective and individualised, allowing people to explore their own understanding of the sacred It is a journey that goes beyond the material world, focusing on the inner self as distinct from the material aspects of life. Many spiritual traditions emphasize the importance of compassion, love, and the interconnectedness of all things, fostering a sense of unity and harmony. Some people find spiritual fulfillment within established religious frameworks. Others discover it through personal experiences, philosophical inquiries, or connections with the natural world. What I would like to do now is to introduce our final final person, who happens to be David Tacey, who wrote The Spirituality Revolution. And we actually have a person here who's a visitor from Sydney, who knows David Tacey. So you can talk to her afterwards a little more about David's personal beliefs and so on. So David did write this book, The Spirituality Revolution, I think in the year 2000. 2003. Okay. And he also presented at the Wilkes Oration here in, I think that might have been wherever it is, 2003. And he also gave an address to the Theosophical Society in Adelaide on the rising interest in spirituality today. So I want to make a few comments from David Tacey's book. Tacey was born in Melbourne, and at 12 years of age his family moved to Alice Springs, where he was greatly influenced by Aboriginal cultures. After completing secondary school there, he enrolled at Flinders University and studied literature, philosophy and art history. He then transferred to Adelaide University and completed a PhD in literature and analytical psychology. In terms of his own spiritual journey, this is what he says: religion taught him to find God in heaven. Aboriginality led him to find the sacred on earth, and psychology revealed to him the possibility of finding sacredness within. Tacey taught literature, spirituality, as Mike told us, and psychology at La Trobe University from 1985 to 2014. He retired from academic life in 2014 to commence a new phase in his life, and he calls himself an independent scholar. I've chosen to include David Tacey in the presentation because he's recognised as one of Australia's leading thinkers in religion and spirituality. And in 2003, he published that book. In it, he says that a spirituality revolution is taking place in Western societies, a revolution that he defines as a spontaneous movement in society, showing a new interest in things of the spirit and its healing effects on the life, health, community and well-being. The spiritual life, he says, is no longer a specialist concern confined to the interests of a religious group. It's available to everyone. Tacey contends that mainline churches are unable to take up any dialogue with the new spirit of our time, partly because they only acknowledge traditional ideas of the sacred. conventional ideas within their own religious tradition. So, to obtain a measure of the extent and popularity of spiritual interest, in 1998, Tacey surveyed 50 of his students in a class at La Trobe who had enrolled in one of his psychology classes. 47 of those 50 students indicated that personal spirituality was a major concern in their lives, while only 2 students said that religion was important. In 2002, he surveyed 125 students in one of his subjects, and 115 of the 125, 92%, indicated an interest in spirituality, and only 10 or 8% indicated that they followed one of the religions. Tacey also quoted Soul of Britain surveys, which are administered by the BBC, and researchers at Nottingham University have been monitoring the results of those surveys in terms of spirituality, and they found extraordinary results in Britain. In the early 2000s, 76% of the population said that they had had a spiritual experience. This was 59% higher than 10 years before and 110% higher than 25 years before. In that address given in Adelaide in 2002, entitled The Rising Interest in Spirituality Today, Tacey lists all the areas that had invited him recently to speak at their conferences. And you'd be amazed at the kind of groups that ask him to speak on spirituality: healthcare and nursing, adolescent health, psychiatry and medicine, religious education, business management, outdoor and physical education, social work, business management and leadership, anthropology and sociology, architecture and landscape design, environmental activism and ecological concerns, Aboriginal reconciliation and the political process. This is an impressive list, and it shows a great breadth of interest. And what Tacey concludes is that virtually every traditional discipline struggles to come to terms with the postmodern interest in spiritual matters. So, in terms of a spirituality revolution, the dictionary definition is a revolution, other than overthrowing the government, is a dramatic and wide-ranging change in conditions, attitudes and operations, a significant and far-reaching change in thinking and ways of being. So I would suggest that the dramatic decline in religion in Australia, in the West in general, and the extensive upswing in spiritual pursuits does constitute a spirituality revolution. And some examples of evidence for the revolution are growing interest in spiritual practices and beliefs, including the increasing popularity of mindfulness and meditation practices, the focus on inner calm, stress reduction, meditation, and work-life balance practices, the rise of eco-spirituality, emphasising a harmonious relationship with nature and recognising the sacredness of the environment, the rise, as we've talked about, of spiritual but not religious numbers, highlighting a changing landscape of belief systems, the plethora of resources online. People now have access to a vast array of spiritual teachings, practices and philosophies from around the world. Social media platforms have become hubs for spiritual communities, and the prevalence of spirituality books in bookshops. Let me just show you a couple that I brought along. Spirituality and the Secular Quest. Spirituality to Go. Rituals and Reflections for Everyday Living. The Workplace and Spirituality. And this is one I specially brought along because my wife's here. It's called The Spirituality of Gardening. And it's quite wonderful if you look at the chapter headings. They are on connection, balance, memory, healing, hope, spiritual practice and resistance. I haven't read that chapter yet. There's a whole series of these. There's about 12 in the series. The spirituality of art. What that's kind of suggesting is that spirituality is actually, for those who practice spiritual practices, integrated into the whole of life. And it's people wanting to integrate all aspects of their life. If we look at the significance, we could say the spirituality revolution is significant in the transformation of approaches to the sacred, away from conventional religious structures towards a more personal and experiential engagement with the sacred. The revolution is significant in terms of addressing a yearning for meaning and purpose in an increasingly complex and fragmented world. Modern society, marked by technological advancements and material pursuits, has left many people feeling spiritually unfulfilled. The spirituality revolution serves as a response to the rapid pace of contemporary life by providing a framework for self-discovery and inner peace. The spirituality revolution has been successful in reshaping the cultural narrative around success and fulfilment. In a world that often measures success in terms of material wealth and external achievements, the spirituality revolution introduces alternative measures such as inner well-being, work-life balance, purpose in life, and a sense of peace. I was going to talk about that fellow, but I'm not. And I'll hand over to Don.
Before we let Esmond off the hook, we have a few moments for a couple more questions, especially from people who haven't had a say so far. Fergus is here to poke his microphone under your nose. Margaret, you were looking anxious before.
Mine isn't a question, it's a comment that here at the ELC, as Esmond said, we've also had Rachel Cohen here as the Wilkes orator, I think around about 2010, and we've got on DVDs, we have David Tacey's two presentations here, So if there's some way we can lend those to people through the office, you might be able to look at David Tacey's presentations yourself, but you must ensure you return them to the ELC.
Thank you very much. Is there another question? Let me use the opportunity offered by standing in front of the microphone to ask you a question, Esmond. I was quite taken with Kim's model of spirituality and religion being represented by two circles which overlap, the traditional sort of Venn diagram. And there obviously is an overlap. In the middle there's a section where we all live quite happily. We are spiritual beings working, many of us, in churches and finding meaningful ways of doing so. It's easy to bag the outside part of the religion side, which is the part associated with rules and dogma and all the dehumanising things that religion has got a bad name for. But there's also a part of spirituality that lies on the extreme that I don't find very attractive, and that's the part that that leads us to making it simply a feel-good thing, where all you're after is something that is good for me, but carries no obligation and no sense of having to engage with the community and, if you like, spread the good news, if I can use the traditional words. Do you think it's possible that we're getting too carried away with the spirituality revolution? And how do we find a balance point in all of that? Good luck, mate.
Well, some little while ago, I went to a session run by a psychologist, the Uniting Churches psychologist, Ian Coates, and it was a Myers-Briggs thing about identifying personality types in the church, which was really interesting. But what happened, and it was well attended, is that his conclusion is that in attending church, 60% want an experience, want to feel something, and only 40% are there to follow any kind of logical sermon, presentation, and what have you. And I think that's probably true. 60% go to connect with people, to have an experience, and as we had in the list of what people want to observe today as spiritual practices, listening to music. I think in churches, as I like to do, we have a time where it's just music and people have their own thoughts and they can connect and engage. I think there should be ways of combining the two, but somebody in what I quoted, it was, can't think of which one it was, who said that churches don't have conversations with people in the spirituality field because they believe that their set of beliefs and so on are the only ones. I think there should be an integration. There could be good things in the spirituality movement that are included in services of worship and the life of a church, and I do think that the spirituality movement is a bit conscious of people being egocentric and, as you say, only following things that make me feel good, but there are some spirituality things, like the pursuit of social justice is a spirituality activity, I think, and that is based outside of oneself. So I guess in both spirituality and religion there are upsides and downsides, and we do need to have a balance of what's best in the both. Is that a satisfactory answer?
You did very well, Esmond. Sorry about that one. Well done. So may I ask you all to thank Esmond in the usual way. A couple of notices about forthcoming events. On the 19th of May, here in this place at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, that's a Sunday afternoon, Andrew Telfer will be speaking to us about Life in the Slow Lane, a view of life in Palestine. A very, very topical conversation at this time in the light of world events and what's happening in Israel and in Gaza. Andrew was posted as a what's it called? An ecumenical accompanier. Ecumenical accompanier. I had the abbreviation but not the words. Working with Palestinians in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. So he carries with himself a first-hand experience of what life is like living in what many would call an occupied country. So come along on the 19th of May at 2 p.m. It's a free event, there's no cost, but we would like you to register. So please, if you can and you wish to come, register on the usual ELC website. It's easy to find the event. The next event in our series here in Progressive Christianity is to be presented by the Reverend Dr. Lee Levitt-Olson, who some of you will know, on the continuing task of reimagining God. So it picks up some of the themes that Esmond has picked up tonight and what we've heard from previous presenters here about the size of God being perhaps much more than we might have recognised in the past and extended into his relationship with the cosmos and indeed our responsibility for reacting under that. It will be a very, very thought-provoking session. We're flying Lee down from Darwin for it, so it'd be great to have a good attendance here to honour his presence here. So that will be in the first Thursday of the month, as we're always meeting this year, the 6th of June, and I encourage you to come. And finally, the feedback forms. It's not a prerequisite that you fill them in before we'll give you a cup of tea or coffee, but it almost is. So please fill in your reactions there. It's pretty easy. Tick the boxes and we'll collect them later. And we invite you to stay with us for a cup of tea, coffee and biscuits afterwards. And I've obviously forgotten something.
No, you haven't forgotten something. You're indulging me. And I just want to add to what you said about Lee. I saw him back in August. Lee Levitt-Olson really is quite a remarkable person. Since he's been in Darwin, he has really immersed himself in the field of Indigenous people and their world, and we're flying him, as Don said, we're flying him down from Darwin, and we want to fill this place because we've got to pay for it. So, but I also want to just mention something coming up on Sunday week, on the 12th of May. It's History Month, and we have an event that's there on celebrating the power of First Nations people to survive and flourish. And it's got the poster out there which you might like to have a look at. But I really want to sort of wave that and commend that to you as well. Thanks, Don.
Good on you, John. And there's also a poster about the Andrew Telfer presentation. Feel free to come and grab one of these if you are interested in following up. But it's all on the web, so you can find it there. So let me call this portion to a close and wish our online audience all the best as we go and spend some time together over a cup of tea. Thank you.